This morning I read to you from John chapter 13, verses 31 through 35. I'm reading from the Common English Bible. When Judas was gone, Jesus said, "Now the human one has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify the human one in himself, and will glorify him immediately. Little children, I'm with you for a little while longer. You will look for me, but just as I told the Jewish leaders, I also tell you now, where I'm going, you can't come. I give you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, so you must love each other. This is how everyone will know you are my disciples, when you love each other." This is the word of God for us, the people of God. You know, this is a farewell address that Jesus is giving to his disciples in this chapter of John. A farewell address was something quite well known in biblical times. Teachers and other leaders in community and religious communities would often give these addresses when they knew something was going to be going on, that they would be away from their people. Maybe permanently, maybe just for a time. They have a certain cadence that goes with them, these farewell addresses. And it would include a final greeting to them, some encouragement to them, and then it would end with a commandment for them. Now, Jesus' farewell address is a little bit different in that he begins by talking about the Son of Man, or the human one, being glorified. So it kind of throws things off kilter. But it ends in the same way that any farewell address of that time would end. And that is with that commandment. You know that commandment. You heard it, didn't you? You shall love one another as I have loved you. Now, it seems kind of odd to us to hear of Jesus giving a farewell address, because we're Easter people, right? We know the story of the resurrection well. We know how things turn out. It doesn't seem right that Jesus would ever have to give a farewell address, because we know he comes back. He comes back. But it's important for Jesus to do that, even in this particular instance, for two reasons. One, to show that the very coming back that's going to happen is part of that glorifying process he tells his disciples about. But even more importantly, Jesus gives this address so that he can give that commandment that disciples, both then and now, need to hear. The commandment that is so very hard to keep, maybe the hardest of all the commandments to keep, is this particular commandment. You shall love each other even as I have loved you. Now, folks, I've come to realize in my decades of preaching now that I have a certain brand, okay? A certain brand, a certain way that I preach. Some people refer to it as, oh, he's always preaching love. He's always preaching that soft stuff. You know, there's never any of the heavy stuff when it comes to Scott. Well, that's fine. I don't think of it as soft stuff, and I don't mind being branded that way, for that matter. I know it's not the only way to preach. I realize that. I'd be silly if I didn't. But the truth of the matter is, this way of preaching is the way that captured me for Jesus' kingdom. This message is the one that dug deep into my heart and made me realize that this Jesus we're talking about has life-changing abilities. So I don't apologize for that. I simply do it because I know that the hardest command Jesus has ever given is this one we just read. You are to love one another even as I have loved you, because by this people will know you are my disciples. Jesus didn't say, you know that you're my disciples by anything else, didn't give any other criteria except that. Love. Love one another. No commandment is more difficult or more vital to being living proof of a loving God. We see that first and foremost in Jesus. Jesus himself, a gift from heaven, came to be among us, came to teach us, took on human's form so that he could be here and know us. And when even that wasn't enough, Jesus chose to show his love in the ultimate way, by dying death on a cross as a criminal. And then by being raised again by God to show the glory of the love Jesus had for us, for you, for the world. So when we first look for living proof of a loving God, the very first place we should always look is to Jesus. To Jesus. And we can also see this, how difficult this commandment is and how vital it is, even as we look throughout the history of the church. Even in the very beginning of the church, we see how difficult and vital this commandment is. You know, we think sometimes, falsely, I believe, we think that the early Christians had it so much easier than we did because they were so much closer to Jesus and so much closer to the apostles and so much closer to everything that happened. But you know what? They didn't get things all that right either. Just pick up the New Testament, turn to one of Paul's letters, and you'll read about fighting that was going on in the church. Not with the people outside the church, not with their society at large, not with things that were going on there, but within the church. You read 1st or 2nd Corinthians, and you'll see that there were all these divisions of people within the church. And Paul's saying, how? How is Christ divided? We only have one thing to do, people. One thing. Love each other as Christ has loved us. We want to show the world that there's living proof of a loving God. Paul says, that's how we do it. That's the way. That's how it's done. And I'd love to say that things have gotten better through the ages. That maybe, wisdom and experience and 2,000 years of practicing being the church has helped us. But no, we're still not quite there, it seems. I mean, even United Methodism, a church that was built on that idea of loving each other as Christ loved us, we can't seem to get it right. I mean, you just look back a few months ago to our special general conference that was called. It doesn't matter so much what the results were in the midst of that general conference. But anybody who saw it had to wonder, what is this Jesus stuff? Because United Methodists from different parts of the world, different parts of the United States, would stand up, call each other names, wish each other dead, call curses out on one another, point to people and say how they are sinful. And those were the bishops they were pointing at. And Jesus says we only have to do one thing: love one another as he loved us. So I wish I could say, I wish this wasn't the picture of the church that people get, but it's there. We can't deny it. Sometimes I really, really wish what they would see is what I get to see sometimes. You know, like this week, as people from this congregation reached out to Skip's family in so many different ways. In prayer, in presence, with gifts, with service, with witness. Gosh, those words sound so familiar to me. But in all those 5 ways, they reached out to a family that was grieving, and they loved them. It didn't matter if they had any differences. It didn't matter if they thought differently about anything. They just loved. Or maybe I wish the world could see the way you all are handling this really odd time in a church's life where you know you're transitioning in pastors. You know that change is taking place. You know that time for saying farewell is there, and that time for greeting is coming. And in both ways, you are embracing someone with love. Sometimes I wish that that's what the world got to see. Because that's the real living proof of a loving God that we need. My brothers and sisters, when Jesus was getting ready to leave, he said, I give you one commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Do I really need to explain that?